in Revelation. And this morning, we're going to, this is going to be the first of 8 sermons that I'm going to share with you that deals with the 7 churches in Revelation. 1 letter, 7 churches. Most of us are familiar with the Revelation of John, the last book of the New Testament, or at least we think we are. I mean, maybe as you read the Revelation, you might have paused on some of the sensational bits. The dragons, the beasts with 7 heads and 10 horns, the locusts the size of Volkswagens. For most of us, what we know about the Revelation reminds us of a Hollywood-style action movie. However, the Revelation was originally addressed to a group of believers who didn't have the benefit of the graphic explanations that we see today. 2 comments that you might find interesting is what one person who wrote about the Revelation said this: there are as many riddles in Revelation as there are words. Another one wrote, the study of Revelation either finds us or leaves us mad. So let's start with a little bit of background to the book of the Revelation. The book itself tells us that the author was someone by the name of John. Now, tradition tells us that this was the Apostle John, but while there's no particular biblical evidence of that, we do know that the author's name was John. Those of us who are in the know tell us that there's a good chance that the book was written by someone whose first language was not Greek. William Barclay, writer of Bible commentaries, says this about the Greek that was used here. He says that it is vivid, powerful, and pictorial. But from the point of grammar, it's easily the worst Greek in the New Testament. He makes mistakes which no schoolboy who ever knew Greek would have made. You see, John wrote in a style that's often called apocalyptic literature. Now, this comes from the Greek, and the word means the unveiling. The apocalyptic writings were very popular between the Old and the New Testaments. The Jewish people had been living under the rule of occupying armies for 500 years. And they looked to the day when the Messiah would finally arrive and rescue the people. And the Revelation borrows from much of that literature style, but the very message of the Revelation is that it is very, very Christ-centered. Scholars place the writing of the Revelation somewhere between 90 to 95 years, about 60 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus. The letter was written from a small island in the Mediterranean Sea called Patmos. And we're told by John, there's a picture of it there, that he found himself there because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. John had been exiled to Patmos. It was a penal colony situated in the Aegean Sea, somewhere between Turkey and the Isle of Crete. And if we look at the picture here, we can see that it's ideally located, and it's a fairly pleasant island. It's 10 miles long and 5 miles wide, and listen to the words of Sir Philip Ramsay, who says this: John's banishment would be preceded by scourging, marked by perpetual fetters, scanty clothing, insufficient food, sleep on the bare ground, a dark prison, and work under the lash of the military overseers. So this wasn't a pleasant time for him at all. Pretty rugged conditions for a man that was probably in his 90s at this point. And even though he wasn't forced into actual hard labor, it was still exile. Exile far from his home, far from his family and his friends. And it was the time of the Emperor Domitian. Emperor Domitian. He was the first emperor to insist on emperor worship. That is, he actually believed that he was a god. And he insisted that he be worshipped as such by his subjects. Every year, his subjects were required to appear at the temple and offer a pinch of incense and utter the words, "Caesar is Lord." Well, there's a problem here. For the Christians, that posed a bit of a problem because they believed that only Jesus is Lord. And so they refused to obey. So Domitian responded by saying any of those who refused to call him God would be executed or imprisoned or exiled. And it would appear that John had been exiled probably from about the year 90 or 96 after the death of Domitian. And so here he is on this rocky, barren island. And this is the vision from here that he paints, the vision that he records from the Revelation. The influence of the sea can be seen throughout the book, with the word sea being used some 25 times in different analogies. At times, as you read through the book, you can almost hear the crash of the waves in the background as John tells us that in Revelation chapter 1, verses 10 and 11, it was the Lord's day, and I was worshiping in the Spirit. Suddenly, I heard a loud voice behind me, a voice that sounded like a trumpet blast. And it said, "Write down what you see and send it to the 7 churches, Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea." Now, a couple of points here. No one has ever really established what it meant to be worshiping in the Spirit. Some would contend that John was in some sort of a mystical trance. Like some would say that he was just enjoying some private worship between him and the Lord. The term the Lord's Day would imply that it was the first day of the week, which is Monday. And John was worshiping. Maybe he'd been reading his scriptures and meditating on the goodness, but we don't know what it was that specifically entailed worshiping in the Spirit for John. But we do know that he was in a position spiritually to be open and receptive to what Jesus would have him hear. And part of what he learned from the Lord was that this vision, if he addressed to 7 specific churches located in the following cities: Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. The churches are said to be in the Roman province of Asia, which is now in what we call Turkey. So why 7 churches? Why not 3 or 10 or 4? We don't know why these churches were picked, but they were certain. There were certainly more churches in the area, and there have been several theories about why the letter was addressed to these particular individual churches. It's been suggested that John maybe he had a special relationship with these distinct churches. Maybe he had preached there, or maybe he knew their pastors or some of the members, so that they would be more receptive of the letters that were sent. Others have suggested that 7 is the number of completeness, and therefore 7 churches actually represents all churches. The number 7 figures very heavily in the book of Revelation, as it's mentioned over 30 times. There are 7 years, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 angels, 7 bowls, and 7 plagues. These may have been the largest churches in the area, and so maybe the letters were sent to be distributed to other smaller churches in the area. If you refer to the map, you'll see where these churches were. Almost in a circle, almost a circular route. And in a day and age without email or fax machines or postal service, it would be unrealistic to say that every church, that these letters would be sent to every church. It's suggested that not only do the letters apply to 7 specific individual churches, but also they apply to a wider range of churches. There are some who would suggest that each of these churches represents a certain period in church history. For example, some say Ephesus describes the early church, Smyrna, the persecuted church, Pergamum, the popular church, Thyatira, the Dark Ages, Sardis, the Reformation period, Philadelphia, the revived church, and Laodicea, the lukewarm church of today. Now, if it's not confusing enough with the historical meaning, the church age meaning that there is one other way that we can view these churches, and that is indicatively of the various churches that we see today. That is the churches that we find the churches here and now that mirror each of the 7 churches. There are churches just like Ephesus or Sardis or Laodicea. And over the next little while, we're going to look at each of those 7 churches, where they were historically, how the letter applied in that particular situation, and how that might be an analogy of a particular period in church history. And what warnings and advice can we find here in Bramalea Church in this year of 2025? We read from Revelation chapter 1. Earlier in the service, we read that, and this was the last verse that was read. Remember, these are the words of Christ. This is the meaning of the 7 stars that you saw in my right hand, and the 7 gold lampstands. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of glad that Jesus cleared that up for us. But we do need to understand 2 things before we can move on to the individual churches. The clarification that Jesus gives goes back to Revelation 1, chapters 12 and 13. When I turned to see who was speaking to me, I saw 7 gold lampstands, and standing in the middle of the lampstands was the Son of Man. And then Revelation 1 and 16, he held 7 stars in his right hand. So now Jesus is explaining to John what it was that he was seeing. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches. John saw Jesus holding 7 stars in his hand, and Jesus tells him that these stars represent the angels of the 7 churches, which may have clarified that for John, but it doesn't really do a whole lot for us. There are at least 4 possibilities of who those angels are. In its simplest sense, the word angels in the Greek simply means messenger. But in most cases, when the word was used, it meant heavenly messenger. But other times it meant messenger, and there were some who would suggest that these 7 angels were human messengers who'd gathered to take John's message to their respective churches. But when we get into the letters themselves, it will appear that whoever the angels were, they were more than simply messengers. In all other instances in the Revelation, the word angels means angel, a heavenly being. And with that in mind, there's been some who've suggested that, well, maybe these were guardian angels who protected those individual churches. Some early scholars actually believed that these angels would be held accountable if the church went wrong. And if that's true, that each church has its own angel to guide and protect it, then, well, some angels need to be slapped about. See, the problem is that even though it's an angel who is mentioned in the opening of each letter, it's obviously the members of the church who are being addressed. Both Greeks and Jews believe that every earthly being has a heavenly counterpart. And so it's suggested that the angel being addressed is the ideal of the church. That's the way it's supposed to be. It's been suggested that the angels of the church are actually their human overseers, or possibly the pastors. And that the letters were addressed then to the spiritual shepherds. This particular view is backed in Malachi chapter 2, verse 7, which reads, "The priest's lips should guard knowledge, and people should go to them for instruction. For the priests are the messengers of the Lord Almighty." So, in the Greek Old Testament, the word used for messengers is the same word that's used here for the angels. Traditionally, it's been this last view for most scholars that have accepted that the 7 angels were the bishops or the pastors of these 7 churches, which of course has some seriously implications for the pastors. You see, Each one of you is responsible for your individual behavior and your obedience as a believer. However, as the overseer of Ramalini Free Methodist Church, as your pastor, I dare say as your angel, not only am I responsible for my obedience and behavior, but I'm also responsible for your collective obedience and behavior. See, because the 7 stars were held in the right hand of Jesus, that would indicate that the pastor's primary responsibility is not to the congregation as a whole, and not to any one member of the congregation in particular, but to God. See, in 2025, the role of pastor doesn't have the respect in the community or even in the church that it had even 25 years ago. That doesn't mean that it's any less important. I mean, my role in this church is to serve and speak for God. Psalm 105 says, "Do not touch these people I have chosen. Do not hurt my prophets." The 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. So let's go back for a minute to Revelation 1, verses 12 and 13. "When I turned to see who was speaking to me, I saw 7 gold lampstands, and standing in the middle of the lampstands was the Son of Man." Well, 3 things that we need to take note of this. First of all those lampstands were gold, pure gold. They weren't iron or brass or even silver. They were gold. And while that may not mean much to some of us, but it has a different connotation 2,000 years ago. You see, the context of gold when this letter was written was not only of worth, but of purity. Do not write off the church. Society has declared the church to be irrelevant, and some believers feel that they don't need the church at all, that they can worship at home. But God, in His infinite wisdom, has chosen to use this vessel, this church, that we sometimes see as imperfect, as being His instrument of change in the world. In John's vision, he did not see Jesus surrounded by individual believers all worshiping God in their own way. He saw Jesus in the center of the churches. Remember, the scriptures called the church the bride of Christ. Listen in Ephesians 5:27. He did this to present Himself to a glorious church, without a spot or a wrinkle or any other blemish. Instead, she will be holy and without fault. Well, not really. I mean, that's not necessarily a description of the church today. But as long as the church is made up of people who we will have spots and blemishes, but the ultimate plan is for the church to be perfect. By the way, if you ever find the perfect church, then don't go to it. That would wreck it. The second thing we need to see here, not only was it gold, but it was a gold lampstand. Do you know what a lampstand is? It's a stand for a lamp. The church is not a lamp. It's a lampstand. The light does not come from the lamp, from the stand. It comes from the lamp. Now, there's 2 ways that we can view this. and they're both valid. Jesus said in John chapter 8, verse 12, I am the light of the world. If you follow me, you won't be stumbling through the darkness because you will have the light that leads to life. So there are those who say correctly that the light that shines from the church must be Jesus. That when a church no longer preaches Jesus as the Son of God who was born of a virgin, of Jesus who died on the cross and was resurrected on the third day, the Jesus that was offering forgiveness to those who seek it, if that's the case, then they are no longer the church, and they have no light in them. And then there are those who would say, look at John chapter 9, verse 5. Jesus said, while I am still here in the world, I am the light of the world. And then in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus says, you are the light of the world, like a city on a mountain, glowing in the night for all to see. And so there are those who say correctly that Jesus left believers to be light of the world, and that the light that shines from the church is from individual believers, and that is our responsibility to shine that light. And either way, when the light, whether it comes from Christ or from Christians, is removed, then the lampstand is no longer in use. And the third thing about lampstands is that within the framework of the scriptures, when the word lampstand was used, Jews immediately thought of one thing. That's what this is called, the menorah. And this is described in Exodus chapter 25. Make a lampstand of pure hammered gold. The entire lampstand and its decorations will be one piece. The base, the center, lamp cams, the buds, the blossoms. It will have 6 branches, 3 branches going out from each side of the center stem, and it will look something like this. The Revelation is not talking about the 7 lamps that make up the lampstand. No, instead, it's talking about the 7 individual lampstands, and each lampstand has a unity. It's connected to itself. Within the church, there needs to be a unity, and we as a body need to be united. But there's no physical connection between the 7 lampstands. The unity for all of them combined comes from the Christ who is in the center. So you understand that there needs to be a unity within the individual lampstand. That's you and I here at Bramalea Free Methodist Church. And there needs to be unity within the church as a whole, with us and the other Free Methodist churches, and the Free Methodist Church in Canada. And that's what's been presented by the Free Methodist Church in Canada all this past week, touching all of this thing. And so let us be unified. Let us be unity in the lampstand. Amen? Amen. God bless you.